I'm Melissa Shanahan, and this is the Velocity Work Podcast, episode number 32. This podcast is for attorneys who are running their own firms. We explore tactics, tools, and stories related to pushing past simply lawyering well and into building a successful firm. Working in your firm and working on your business are two very different things. This podcast focuses on the latter. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode. Today's content I think is so important and it's pretty advanced, but I hope you can stick with it. As an intro, I will say that as things are peaking, or we aren't at our peak yet in terms of coronavirus, but everything is shifting here for everyone. And when it comes to our work life, we're being told in social media and all over the place online, this is a time to get creative and this is a time to shift things and be innovative. And what I'm noticing is that many of you are actually figuring out and doing what it takes to become virtual. And that I think is super cool. I think that's huge. And I want to commend you for that. But here's the thing, when we are shifting things, no matter how worth it is, and I do think it's very worth it to make some of the changes that everyone is being forced to make right now, it can still be tough to adjust to manage our lives in this new way, whether that means with your family life or any social or personal life, how you deal with clients, how you deal with your team now that all these shifts are being made. And so it all starts and stops with you. And if you are the kind of person who does tend to, you like and you appreciate taking extreme ownership over the results you're getting, you're going to want to listen up to today and be thoughtful about how you are approaching all of this change as we move forward. Today's content, I really had to think a lot longer on than I do for a typical episode because it's so easy to get in the weeds and I find it more difficult to explain these things in a very streamlined and simplified way when it gets as deep as it's going to get today. So this is a bit more of an advanced podcast. If you've listened to episode 10 and 11, then you're going to have it's probably going to sink in better, what I have to say today. So if you haven't listened to episode 10 and 11, I highly suggest that you go back, listen to episode 10, 11. On 11, there's actually a worksheet that you can practice what I'm teaching there. This is building on some of those concepts. If you tend to be hard on yourself, this is the podcast for you. I am in that camp. Many of my clients are in that camp. Actually, most of my favorite people on the planet tend to be in this camp. That's not entirely true, but it's mostly true. And it's because when you're hard on yourself, it's usually because you're striving for big things and you expect greatness from yourself. And when you fall short, how you handle that, tends to be flaws there in how you handle that because you're so disappointed, you're so frustrated with yourself. And you just wish that you didn't have to go through that growth period that it takes to get the ultimate results that we're trying to achieve. You know, we are striving for hard things. That's what we do. And that's, as entrepreneurs, that's what you do. And especially, I think, lawyers, because not only it's like you really do have 2 full-time jobs, 3 if you count just having a personal life, a family life of any sort. The first is being an attorney. The second is running the business. And the third is having a personal life. And so there's really it takes a ton of time, energy, discipline, effort to stay focused so that all 3 of those areas of your life are standing strong and you're able to move forward pretty well in each of those in any given point. And so essentially what I'm trying to say here is it's very easy for people in your shoes and for people who are striving for hard things to be hard on themselves. And it's unnecessary. It's indulgent, and we'll talk about that today. And so the more that you can stay on top of it and the more you can recognize it, the better off you'll be, the faster you'll get to your results, the better off everyone around you will be as well. It's just unnecessary, but we do it to ourselves just on default. It's just a default mode that we enter into when we're frustrated with not achieving the results we wanted to achieve. And I don't mean this just in business. I mean, if you are finding that in a personal relationship, you're actually disconnected from the person instead of more connected with the person, you would probably prefer that there was a better connection there, and you can beat yourself up because maybe you will see your part in how you're contributing to the lack of connection, right? So this can be applied to anything in your life where you aren't really happy with the way that you've shown up. You know that you could do better. And so this is where that applies. It's not just in business, it's in anything in life where you are experiencing that. I am going to start with a very quick recap of what I covered in episode 10, episode 11, just to provide some context or be a refresher. There is a sequence of events that happens over and over and over and over in our life. Even if you're not aware of it, it's still happening. But the more aware that you can be, the better control you have of your outcomes. And you take control where you actually have control. So here's what it is. There are circumstances that happen in the world. These are things that you cannot control. They are facts. You have thoughts about those circumstances, and that creates a very specific feeling state inside of you. Whatever you're thinking, whatever your perspective is on the event that's happening, you're going to feel a very certain specific way. From there, that feeling state, you behave in the world in a very specific way. You take action in the world. This behavior, this action is what stems from how you are feeling. And then from that action, that place of action, you get a very specific result. So this can look a few different ways. If something happens in the world and you are thinking crappy thoughts and you have a crappy perspective, you're going to have a crappy feeling state, and you're probably not going to be taking the action that your highest or your best self would take, right? And then your results are going to show in that. But if something happens in the world and your perspective or the way that you're thinking about it is very high level and very deliberate, and it's more positive, then you create a more positive feeling state, a more productive feeling state. And from there, you take a more productive, more action in the world. You behave more in line with how your best self would behave in that circumstance within this sequence of events. And then you get a specific result that lines up, right? That you produce a more positive result, a more ideal result, a more productive result. And so really your point of power in all of this is your perspective and how you're thinking about things. And even if you intellectually know that, there are times where it's just not that simple, because we're human and things happen. And sometimes we have a crappy perspective. And that's just part of being human. But the more awareness you have over it, the more you actually get or gain control over the things you have control over. So even though we don't have control over the events that happen outside of us, the circumstances that we witness and that we see around us, we do have control on how we think about those things and our perspective on those things. And it's ridiculous to think that we are going to just always automatically fire this most awesome, highest self perspective about everything that's happening around us. That's just not human nature. That's a robot. So it's not about being perfect. It's not about always thinking positive, being positive Polly. Hell no, it's not about that. It's more about, do you have an awareness that, and are you taking extreme ownership over the results that you're getting, and understanding that it's really stemming from the way that your perspective and the way you're thinking about it, because your thoughts trigger feeling states, and from your feeling state, you take very specific action, you behave a certain way, and then you get a certain result. And if you always know that, then you can start to look at where you're not getting ideal results and start to back up and have a look at how you might be able to think differently that will spur a different chain of events that will get you closer to the ideal result that you're looking for. So That's a quick recap. And for those of you that this is brand new to, if I'm losing you, don't worry. Go back to episode 10 and 11. It's actually episode 10 is one of the most popular podcasts we've done. So check that out for sure. Episode 11 is Super Thinking Part 1. And there's a worksheet that goes with that. And it's more fundamentals about this. Also, just as a side note, this whole idea that, there's circumstances, you have thoughts about the circumstances, and those thoughts trigger feeling states, and the feeling state, from that feeling state, you take action and then you get a result. That is essentially cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral psychology. It's also what you will find time and time and time and time again in any self-help book you read or any spiritual book you read. It really is, it's just a different way of explaining this model that I just took you through. Brooke Castillo is my favorite. She's the one that really teaches the model of the CTFAR, circumstances, thoughts, feelings, actions, results. It's the most direct way that I've heard it be talked about. And so that's what I really tend to share is the most direct way that I've heard. But you will notice, you will pick up on, they always talk about in self-help and self-development and in spiritual texts, anything, you always see that your point of power is how you're thinking about things, what you believe about things, your perspective about things. That's your point of power. And the reason is because all the stuff underneath, in terms of your feelings, your actions, and your results, your thoughts and your perspective produce all of that. And so it's really understanding that and just having an awareness. Okay, so I'm done with the basics. This episode is called Layered Thinking because when you tend to be hard on yourself, what ends up happening is that there is this event that happens. Let's just say you aren't on your best game and you have a crappy perspective and you don't show up, you feel like crap and you don't show up in a way that you're really proud of. And you didn't produce the result that you're really proud of. You really kind of just either flew off the handle or just went unconscious. You weren't being very deliberate. What tends to happen after that, if you are someone that tends to be hard on yourself, it doesn't just stop there. You form this new sequence about the thing that you're not as happy with. So let's just say, for example, someone said something to you. It doesn't even matter what it was, like at all. So the circumstances, someone said something to you. And you had this perspective, you took this stance where you got really defensive. If you think about it from that whole circumstances, thoughts, feelings, actions, and results, if someone said something to you, the action is you got defensive. So your thought about it was probably something like, oh, hell no. Or something like, she is in the wrong. She doesn't know what she's talking about. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Like your thought could be something like that. And then your feeling state that when you think that thought, oh, hell no, or he doesn't know what he's talking about, then the feeling state is usually either defensiveness or frustration or anger or whatever, right? And then you act defensive. And the result that you get is, it depends on the situation, but at its core is just a disconnectedness from the person or a continued misunderstanding, right? Like it's not an ideal result. After the fact, and sometimes even when you're in it, you could be handling it better. Or if you're evaluating it and it's already happened, you could have handled it better. And so you start to beat yourself up over this. You start to just not be able to let this go. And what happens is you don't just look at that situation for what it was, and you don't look at it from the way that we've been talking about it, where you really take ownership in a way where you actually examine, okay, where did this go wrong? What was I thinking? What was my perspective? And in just having a look at it and deciding like, can I shift that a little bit? Just instead of doing that, what we tend to do is we start having new thoughts about all that shit that went down. So we will think something like, I should have been better in that situation. I shouldn't have been so impatient. I suck. Sometimes, it's more simple. It's more like, I suck. I'm a loser. I never do this right. I always let people down. I'm always the problem here. Like we will start to do that in our minds, and whatever shape it takes for you. but I'm speaking from experience, and I've had a lot of experience working with clients on these things. So I know the defaults, right? The typical defaults. And when you start to beat yourself up over it, you layer on thinking on top of the original situation, which is very unhelpful, very unnecessary. It doesn't produce any results that are great, right? It's just kind of what we do on default if we tend to beat ourselves up. When this happens, you have to know that it's a pattern that you do. And there are some tips I'm going to give you, but just knowing that it's a pattern is the most important thing that you can do for yourself, is just having that awareness. The reason this is a problem when you start layering on thinking is because it only perpetuates results that you don't really want. It doesn't take you anywhere. Something to consider is that this whole idea of just layering on thinking about the original situation is very indulgent. And I want you to sit with that for a minute, because sometimes it feels productive. And I have people say to me, well, I am taking extreme ownership. That's why I feel so crappy about all of this. Like I am taking the blame. And here's the thing. Blame is pointless in this whole situation. Blame is indulgent. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't solve anything. It just keeps you spinning in loops about the original situation. So understanding that layering your thinking on top of the original situation is indulgent, and it's full of blame, and that's pointless and it's useless. Whether you're blaming someone else or whether you're blaming yourself, it doesn't matter. It's all useless. And so this is where, if you can start to just understand how useless and pointless it is, because most people I work with are not really interested in wasting their time, but this is a waste of your time. And so if you can start to realize that that's what's happening, you're wasting your time by layering your thinking, then you can call it to a halt much easier, because you don't want to waste your time, right? Okay, so you've got this chain reaction that we've talked about that happens over and over and over and over and over and over in your life, whether for the good or for the bad, right? Which is the circumstances. You have a thought about the circumstance, creates a feeling state, you take action from that feeling state, and then you get a specific result. That's like a chain of events that happens. It's a sequence that's inevitable. It happens all the time, all day, every day, for every human. We produce the results that we get, whether they make us really happy or not. And when you layer your thinking, then you create this new chain of events internally about the original thing, right? About the original chain of events. And so when you do that, it's almost like you have if you were to write this out on paper and use that worksheet that goes with episode 11, if you were to get this out on paper, you would see there's one sequence of events, and then there's another sequence of events about the original. And then there's another sequence of events about the sequence of events about the original. Like it gets very in the weeds about a specific situation. And if you're listening to this and you are not sure that you can identify with it, you can tell for sure that you're doing it when you get very blamey, when you're blaming yourself or others. Anytime you're blaming, it's just pointless, and it's definitely stacked on top of something else. You're blaming something about something else. The other thing is, if you notice that you're super judgy towards yourself or towards others, you know you are layering on top of something else. It's just not about, like, you're spinning in a way that isn't really about anything relevant. It's just adding on top of things. Another way to identify if this is something that you're doing is when you are having a crappy perspective about something that's already happened. Then you know you are just layering your thinking on top of the thing that happened. And it's so indulgent. And you will start to pick up on this because you will realize there's such a better use of your time than to do that. Something else that may help here with just bringing this home and trying to bring it full circle, I really want to make sure that you guys do understand this concept. Psychologists who subscribe to acceptance and commitment therapy, which is called ACT, they call this kind of suffering dirty pain. Clean pain is when you feel something hurtful that happens to you. But dirty pain is the result of your thoughts about how wrong it is, how it proves we and life are bad, right? The two kinds of suffering, there's clean pain and dirty pain. So both of those are considered suffering. The two kinds of suffering, what is taught is that they occupy different sections of the brain. One part simply registers the events, while another creates this continuous stream of thoughts about those events. And the vast majority of our unhappiness comes from the secondary response, not from the painful reality, but from the painful thoughts about the reality. Okay, so why do we care about this? Why am I doing a podcast about this? I don't do podcasts unless I really think it's going to be something that will add value and be helpful to you on your journey towards creating the firm and the life that you love. The firm and the life that you want to create. The reason this is such a problem and that I wanted to make sure to shine some light and help potentially provide you with some awareness is because it perpetuates results that you don't really want. It slows down your progress. And it's because when we indulge in layering our thinking, we inevitably, instead of using our brain for creating what we want to create, we spin on things, crappy feeling states and producing results that are less than. And we are capable of more than that. It is useful to really understand how to override your brain, the default ways that your brain works. It is time to get an awareness and evolve beyond just the default mode. And so that's what this podcast is about. You know, I've talked extensively about if you want to create this firm and life that you want to create, and I know you guys are striving for big things, you have to become the kind of person that can have and handle that size of firm, that team, that family that you want, the life that you want. You have to evolve. I heard an awesome quote the other day that I'm going to start using more and more. A woman named Chris Plackey said, "The best way to grow a business is to grow the person who's running it." And I could not agree more. That is 100% the truth. And this right here, this concept that we're talking about today, this is a way to get an awareness and to catapult yourself into a more productive version of yourself and to call bullshit when you notice that this is happening. So now I'm going to talk about, okay, once you recognize you have this, that's great. Like I do this. So now what? Just having an awareness, Melissa? Well, yes, that does go a long way, but I do have some other additional tips and things that you can think about to help shift yourself into a more productive mode and get out of this layered thinking. The first thing I'll say is, yes, you have to have an awareness. So everything we've talked about in this podcast so far, really understanding that and grasping that is very important. So if you need to go back and listen to this again, go back and listen to it again. But really grasping that you layering your thinking means that you're layering your feelings, you're layering actions and how you behave, and you are perpetuating results. And while you're doing all that, you are just soaking up precious time and precious brain power. Essentially, you're buffering. You know when you're loading a video and it's buffering? So frustrating, right? It's just like a holding pattern. That's what you're doing with your own life when you indulge in this. So intellectually understanding this is the first step for sure. Now, anytime we're learning something new, we first will understand it intellectually, but we aren't really going to get it until we put it into practice, until we start really working with it. That is like, which I've said here before on the podcast, that's like you can read a book on how to swim, but that doesn't mean you're going to know how to swim, right? It's important. Maybe it gives you tips that you really understand what to do once you get in the water. But until you get in the water and you do those things, you don't know how to swim. So it's the same thing here. Understanding intellectually first. And then once you recognize that this is a pattern for you and you do understand it, the second that you notice that you're doing it from here on out, you have to get used to putting a dead stop to it. You don't have to fix it. You just have to practice stopping, just halting. And sometimes, you guys, when I'm working with this, I will realize I'm doing it. I'm just layering on thinking. And to stop it, I will literally say out loud, stop. That's it. Because I know what's best for me, best for the results I want to create. And that ain't it, right? So putting a dead stop to it. Another way that I talk about this with clients when they get to indulging in things like this mentally, I will tell them you need to have a cut the shit conversation with yourself. If that means you go look at yourself in the mirror and you say, pull yourself together, at least don't indulge in anymore. You may not know the right way to move forward. You may not know how to feel better in this moment, but this is stopping. So it's more just being really relentless with yourself and not allowing the indulgence of it, of layering your thinking. It means sometimes being a drill sergeant with yourself. And I am a fan of being compassionate with yourself, and we'll get there, but sometimes you need something a little more drastic in the moment to just cut it out, because this is a pattern that you're breaking, and breaking patterns is never easy. It's always worth it, but it's never easy. And so sometimes you really have to jerk yourself out of it. Now, if you just did those two things that I just talked about, so recognizing that this is a pattern, just having an awareness and having this intellectual understanding of it, and you put a dead stop to it the second that you feel yourself going down that, you realize that you're going down that path, that you're layering your thinking. If you just did those things, you are off to a great start, because you're stopping the typical pattern that you take. And unless you do that, you're not going to have success with anything else. So just stopping it. Once you've called yourself out, you've stopped it, you just stopped dead in your tracks. The next thing to do is to sit down with a pen and with a piece of paper and write out, what is the circumstance? What's the fact? It's the thing that you don't have control over. And then look at, what was your thought about the thing? What feeling state do you have about that thing? And how are you behaving in the world? What action are you taking in the world? And what result is that giving you? And just look at it. You can use the worksheet that went along with episode 11 to sit down and get organized in terms of this. But this is how you take extreme ownership. It isn't by indulging in self-blame and you really think you're owning it because you're just beating yourself up over it. You know you were the problem. No. That's not helpful. Taking extreme ownership is actually sitting down and looking at the situation for what it is, being very objective, and just having a look. When you do sit down to do this work, if you especially just use the worksheet I provided, what you'll notice is that you will start to see where your point of power is, which really is like how you're thinking about it, and you can start to shift it. And you will notice that the model or that sequence of events that you're evaluating, it was unintentional. It was default. Because if you were being very conscious, you would have reacted in a different way. So it's the default mode. So you will have this unintentional model that you're working with, and then you'll look at, okay, if I could do this over, I can't, but if I could, I really want to learn. I want to teach myself how to maybe approach this differently and how to be different in moments like these. And so then you can rewrite the situation and have an intentional model. Like, what would that have looked like? And just the practice of this, you will start being able to shift much more quickly in real time because you've had practice at having such a deep awareness that it starts to manifest in your own life. That's just kind of how it works because you're getting so familiar with it. And you're able to stop your brain from going down this default rabbit hole of a track. And you'll be able to have more dominion over your thinking brain. It's pretty cool. I mean, it doesn't take long for these results to show up. The majority of people won't sit down to do this work. So if you sit down to do this work, if you take it to the next level, not just by having an awareness, by recognizing it, but actually then sitting down and working with it and exploring what it could look like if you handled it differently the next time, if your thought process was differently the next time, and then let it go. But do that every time you start to blame yourself or judge yourself. Just cut it out, however that needs to look for you, however harsh you need to be with yourself on that. Just stop dead in your tracks. Then go sit down and work with this stuff. And when you do that, you will be amazed at just how it's like light bulbs will go off. Like, oh my God. You'll start to realize that you believe a bunch of crap that you don't need to believe, that you have a bunch of assumptions you don't need to have. And you'll have this deeper and deeper and deeper understanding of yourself and how you work and how you operate and the way that you believe and the typical perspective that you have. And then you'll be able to shift it because you'll have a deeper awareness of what's going on inside. So it's almost like what I was telling you before, it is to have an intellectual awareness of this concept. That helps you have an awareness of what's being played out in the world. But when you sit down to work with this stuff on paper, then you start to have a deeper awareness of what's going on inside of you and how you tend to operate. And once you understand that, the world opens up. Then you can actually do something with the information and with the awareness. You'll be able to do something with that that's productive. Y'all listening to this podcast are striving for great things. You wouldn't be listening to this if you weren't. So do yourself a favor, call bullshit on yourself when you notice that you're indulging and you are layering thinking. Sit down, do the work of exploring, use the worksheet I provided. Go back and listen to episode 10. Go back and listen to episode 11. Re-listen to this episode again if you need to. But this is how you start to shift it. And the more that you can become this higher version of yourself, this best version of yourself, you can keep rising to that, the faster you will create the results that you want to create outside of you. And you won't be wasting time in this indulgent act of layering your thinking and holding yourself back from what you're meant to achieve. I'll see you next week, everybody. Hi guys, it's me again. Thanks so much for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it, and I hope you did, please subscribe so that you get real-time updates whenever we drop a new episode. If you want to continue to hang out with us, come on over to our website and check out how we work with clients. It's our signature 3-phase approach that we use with law firms to achieve growth on their own terms. Head to velocitywork.com/begin for information about those 3 phases and how you might get started if you'd like. Again, that's velocitywork.com/begin. If there's a topic you'd like covered on a future episode, or a question you have, or someone you'd love to have interviewed on the Velocity Work podcast, go to speakpipe.com/velocitywork. Leave us a voice message there. It can be anonymous or not. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to hang out with us on social, come on over to Instagram. Our handle is velocity.work. And on Facebook, it's facebook.com/meetvelocitywork. Cheers, my friends, to real growth and a great life. Bye, guys. Show notes from this episode can be found at velocitywork.com/podcast.